They say trust is earned, never given, and in the high-stakes world of MMA, trust can be shattered in an instant. Rivalries erupt, alliances crumble, and friendships forged over countless hours in the gym can suddenly fall apart under the brightest lights. From devastating contract disputes to shocking personal feuds, these moments of betrayal have left fans reeling and fighters questioning everything they once believed. But how did these bitter breaks in loyalty come about? And were they truly unavoidable? Or did ambition and ego push people to make choices they'd regret forever? When Colby Covington showed up at American Top Team, he wasn't a star yet. He was a solid wrestler with big dreams but limited resources. Jorge Masvidal, already a well-known fighter, took him in, letting him crash on his couch and introducing him to key coaches. They trained side by side, forging a close bond that seemed unbreakable. Everything changed when a dispute over a coach's share of Colby's fight purse spiraled out of control. Jorge felt Colby stiffed the coach he'd personally recommended, an act that stung deeply given their long-standing friendship. Colby, on the other hand, claimed he was being unfairly targeted for bigger cuts now that he was rising in the welterweight rankings. Soon Covington began his persona as an outspoken, polarizing character, and Masvidal became prime fodder for his trash talk. The two started airing each other's personal secrets in interviews, dragging families and personal lives into their feud. Fans watched in shock as men who once cheered each other on now squared off in the octagon, hurling insults that cut deeper than any punch could. To Masvidal, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He'd offered Covington a home, set him up with training connections, and treated him like a brother. In return, Colby used their personal history as ammunition for hype and pay-per-view buys. Their rivalry may have boosted interest in their fight, but it left both men with irreparable scars that serve as a cautionary tale. Success can sometimes cost more than any contract is worth. Even outside the gym, betrayals can come from the corporate world, as one storied video game company discovered. Before Michael Bisping became a UFC Hall of Famer and England's first UFC champion, he was just a gritty fighter from a small UK gym called Wolfslair. He trained alongside veterans like Rampage Jackson and Czech Congo under a management headed by Anthony McGann. The gym played a pivotal role in launching Bisping's career, but as the money and fame rolled in, cracks in their alliance began to show. Bisping claimed he was locked into an exploitative contract, alleging that his earnings were mismanaged and partially withheld. At times he believed he was seeing only a fraction of the pay he was owed, with management pocketing more than their fair share. Tensions escalated until Bisping took legal action against his former manager. Wolfslair countersued, pointing to the contract's stipulations. Caught in the fallout was Bisping's friendship with Rampage Jackson, who initially sided against the Count and labelled him a traitor, only to discover his own issues with Wolfslair later on. The lawsuit eventually concluded, with Bisping ordered to pay a significant sum in unpaid commissions. But from his perspective, the real betrayal went far beyond court filings. Feeling used by those he once trusted, Bisping found out that forging a path to stardom in MMA sometimes means cutting ties with people who refuse to let you grow on your own terms. But that's far from the last time a fighter realised he'd been cast aside. Gym loyalty in MMA is usually sacrosanct. Your teammates become your family, your coaches, your mentors, and your shared dream a rallying cry. Yet one of the biggest falling outs in recent MMA history occurred at Team Alpha Male, famously orchestrated in part by the friction between TJ Dillashaw and the team's founder, Uriah Faber. TJ had built his name under Alpha Male's roof, climbing to UFC gold in the bantamweight division. But when Dwayne Ludwig, a striking coach, left to start his own academy in Colorado, TJ accepted an offer to train there and supposedly even got paid to do so. Suddenly Dillashaw's loyalty became suspect. Was he representing Team Alpha Male or Ludwig's camp? He tried to juggle both worlds, but rumours circulated that he was double-dipping, benefiting from the Alpha Male environment while funneling knowledge to another gym. Even worse, teammates like Cody Garbrandt felt betrayed. He claims TJ insisted he was never leaving, then slipped away for money behind their backs. Conor McGregor famously poured gasoline on the fire by branding TJ a snake in the grass during The Ultimate Fighter. The entire fiasco erupted into heated press conferences, bitter social media spats, and eventually major fight bookings. The fans ate it up, but the breakdown of a once close bond left behind a sense that business, ambition, and personal goals overshadowed loyalty. But ambition can also pit best friends against each other, and that's exactly what happened next. Few bonds in mixed martial arts seemed as unbreakable as the one shared by Conor McGregor and Artem Lobov. They trained side by side in Ireland, sharing cramped gyms, chasing the same dream. Artem's presence on The Ultimate Fighter was largely thanks to Conor's influence, and the two stood together when outside threats targeted either of them. So when they stepped into the limelight, Conor breaking PPV records and Artem standing in his corner, no one could predict how badly it would all unravel. The turning point came when proper number 12 whiskey, Conor's blockbuster brand, skyrocketed in value. According to Lobov, he was the one who originally pitched the idea of creating an Irish whiskey line, fully expecting a share of the profits. Conor, in Artem's telling, had offered him a $1 million settlement at one point, which Artem refused. Believing the brand's success was partly his doing, he filed a lawsuit seeking compensation. Conor laughed off the legal action, turning to social media to mock Lobov and firing off jabs that stoked the flames of betrayal. Lobov alleged he was simply fighting for what was promised, but many fans saw a devastating end to a once inseparable duo. The courts dismissed the suit, and subsequent suits went nowhere. Today their bond seems irrevocably broken, a reminder that when money floods in, even brotherly ties can shatter under the weight of ambition and resentment. Still, these relationships aren't the only ones that have been torn apart as fans looked on. Few fighters command as much respect in their home country as Glover Teixeira does in Brazil. After a stunning career that included capturing the UFC light heavyweight belt at an age many would have considered past prime, Glover defied the odds and kept delivering wars in the octagon. By the time the UFC returned to Brazil, in front of a roaring crowd, everyone expected a triumphant send-off, or at least a valiant last stand if Glover decided to walk away. His showdown for the title turned brutal and one-sided, yet he showcased heart by surviving to the final bell. Exhausted and battered, Glover took the mic in what would become his final appearance as a competitor in the UFC. It was the moment every fan had come to witness, except many didn't stay to see it. By the time Glover announced his retirement, half the arena had emptied, with droves of spectators leaving before he could say his final goodbyes. Online, fans from around the world voiced outrage. How could an icon of Brazilian MMA be treated with such indifference in his own homeland? Some pointed to the late hour. Others blamed the abrupt end to the main event's competitiveness. Still, nothing could soften the sting of seeing a revered champion address a sea of vacant seats. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from a friend or a management team. It comes from the crowd you trust to stand by you in victory and defeat. Next, we arrive at a betrayal that hits even closer to home. Imagine dedicating your entire professional life to building a brand. You become so synonymous with its success that, upon retirement, you're practically an ambassador for the company. That's what happened to Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes in the UFC, two legends who helped keep the organisation afloat before its worldwide explosion in popularity. As a thank you, they were both offered cushy roles, Chuck Liddell as a Vice President of Business Development and Matt Hughes as a Vice President of Athlete Development and Government Relations. Their gratitude was short-lived. When the UFC sold to WME-IMG, the new owners slashed costs and quickly deemed these icons non-essential employees. With little more than a handshake and maybe a brief phone call, Chuck and Matt were out. Both men admitted the abrupt exit cut deep. They'd poured their blood, sweat and tears into making the UFC a household name, only to be discarded as if their ongoing presence was irrelevant. Some critics argued that the UFC should have found more meaningful ways to leverage these former champions' expertise. if not at least given them a fitting send-off. Instead, they were left feeling like relics of a bygone era. Fans who grew up watching their legendary battles saw it as a gross sign of disloyalty. Corporate takeovers often lead to tough layoffs, but letting go of foundational figures like Liddell and Hughes without a proper farewell echoed as a harsh betrayal of trust. Up next is a betrayal so personal that it became a massive rivalry played out for the entire world to see. For a time, THQ held the exclusive license to produce UFC video games, creating the undisputed series that thrilled fans with its innovative gameplay and solid graphics. Despite producing well-received games, THQ found itself struggling financially. When the going got tough, they sold the UFC license to EA Sports for a modest $10 million, far below what many believed such a marquee property was worth. THQ soon sued, claiming the UFC had colluded with EA to devalue the license. According to THQ, Dana White had once condemned EA for not respecting MMA, only for him to allegedly turn around and quietly encourage them to scoop up the rights at a bargain price. THQ argued there was backstage maneuvering that halted competing bidders, leaving EA with a monopoly on the UFC gaming franchise. The UFC dismissed these allegations, insisting that negotiations were above board. Meanwhile, THQ sank into bankruptcy, never recovering from the loss of one of its last major revenue streams. The betrayal for THQ felt profound. They'd helped pioneer the UFC's video game presence, only to watch their partnership end in a sea of legal papers and financial despair. EA went on to release multiple UFC titles, some lauded, others criticised, but THQ's gaming legacy was erased with alarming speed, leaving fans wondering if corporate politics had struck again. Still, no corporate reshuffle can match the pain of being ignored after 2 decades of loyal service. For countless fans, Mike Goldberg's voice was intertwined with the UFC's biggest moments. From the late 1990s until 2016, he provided the soundtrack to championship wars and highlight reel knockouts. He had his catchphrases, sometimes quirky, sometimes off the wall. And his style wasn't always polished, but nobody could deny his passion for the sport. Then abruptly, his contract expired at the end of 2016, and UFC 207 became his final broadcast. Expecting a heartfelt send-off after 20 years, viewers were stunned when the event ended without a single formal tribute to Goldberg. No video montage, no handshake in the cage, not even a thank you on air, just silence. The rumour mill suggested new owner WME IMG wanted a more professional approach, possibly eyeing sports broadcasters from other promotions. But fans felt a wave of sadness, believing the voice that had guided them through the UFC's tumultuous evolution deserved at least a moment of recognition. Goldberg maintained a stoic demeanour in interviews, noting he was simply part of a larger wave of dismissals under the new regime. Yet behind the calm exterior, there was a sense of betrayal. If loyal service and consistency mattered, why cut ties so coldly? Many supporters decried the UFC's actions as they watched one era close and a more corporate, impersonal era begin. But no blow can be quite as painful as being cast away by the very people who shaped your identity. Frank Shamrock Juarez had a tumultuous upbringing, bouncing between juvenile detention centres before he found stability in the household of Bob Shamrock. Through Bob, he met Ken Shamrock, who helped introduce him to MMA via the Pancrase organisation in Japan. Frank quickly proved himself, defeating elite fighters like Bas Rutten, and returned to the States with renewed passion for this emerging sport. Bob legally adopted him, and he took on the Shamrock name with pride. At first, Frank joined Ken's famed Lion's Den, where they trained side by side. But over time, their methodologies clashed. Frank wanted to adopt new techniques and training philosophies, while Ken demanded strict adherence to old-school routines. Tensions reached a breaking point when Ken kicked Frank out of the gym. Feeling stunned and exiled, Frank sought solace in Bob, only to discover Bob was siding with Ken. According to Frank, the message was clear: reconcile with Ken or lose the family entirely. the betrayal cut to the core. Frank had finally experienced belonging and acceptance under the Shamrock roof, only to see it stripped away when he tried to innovate his fighting approach. Though Frank later repaired his bond with Bob, the damage done by Ken's dismissal and that ultimatum was irreversible. Frank would go on to become a UFC champion in his own right, but the heartbreak of losing a family for the second time remained an unshakable burden. It began as a seemingly golden opportunity for Kat Zingano, a respected UFC veteran hungry for new challenges and greater visibility, when a major Hollywood figure, Halle Berry, appeared ready to produce a film focused on the world of MMA. Kat got the call. There were whispers that Berry wanted real fighters to lend authenticity to the project. Feeling the rush of possibility, Kat turned down an upcoming UFC match, believing she was about to land a dream role that would elevate her career beyond the cage. But the promise soon soured. Almost overnight, Kat learned that not only would she no longer be appearing in Berry's project, but the organisation she had served for so long suddenly released her. Rumours spread that Berry's team suggested Kat not fight for insurance reasons, only for the film to shut her out once she was no longer active in the UFC. In an instant, Zingano found herself without a fight contract and without a major motion picture role. Feeling misled, she pursued legal action, alleging she was advised to give up a fight and then punished for doing so. Ultimately, she dropped her lawsuit. Berry's legal representatives maintained that Kat's UFC release had nothing to do with the film, but that didn't ease the sting of betrayal. Some fans still think behind-the-scenes politicking and a breakdown in communication ended what could have been an exciting collaboration. For Kat, it was a harsh lesson. In MMA and in Hollywood, promises can vanish the moment they prove inconvenient. But that wasn't the only instance of a trusted friend turning into an adversary. MMA has always been about more than just the fights. Gyms become second homes, mentors become father figures, and teammates forge bonds that mirror brotherhood. Yet these stories prove that in a sport driven by individual success, the line between loyalty and self-interest can be dangerously thin. Ambition, money, and personal grudges create a swirling undercurrent that can flip trust into betrayal in a heartbeat. Sometimes it's as simple as a broken promise. Other times entire families and support systems unravel overnight. But what do these betrayals say about the future of MMA? Perhaps they serve as cautionary tales, urging fighters to lock in fair contracts, keep a circle of trustworthy advisors, and remember that fame can be fleeting. Or maybe they underscore the reality that in a profession as unforgiving as cage fighting, every alliance is conditional. When fame collides with fortune, it might be wiser to keep your guard up, even outside the octagon. Whether you sympathise with those who claim they were exploited, or feel the sudden urge to defend the other side, these stories live on as stark reminders that in MMA, having each other's backs is never guaranteed. The next time you watch two fighters embrace at the end of a grueling match, think about the unspoken connections that brought them there, and how quickly such connections can be torn apart. And that final note is perhaps the most unsettling realization of all. In a sport built on warrior code, betrayals can cut deeper than any punch, and the scars they leave might never fully heal.